You monkey! You blue monkey!
Hi everyone, how are y'all? A spicy start because we're going to talk about the dancehall queen Spice, but more so actually about Erica and her racist slurs and her choice and how that implicates the broader Latinidad and the live Latinidad, which I've been wanting to do this video for a while, so I'm excited. This will kind of be an extenuation of the Colonizer Exposed series that is on Patreon. There are a couple of videos on YouTube. How are y'all? I know there was like an awkward pause. I forgot that the clip was that short. And we're drinking New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc Frenzy. It's pretty good. I tried it for the first time yesterday. I shared it with a friend, so it wasn't all me. How are y'all? We haven't had a live stream on YouTube in a couple weeks. Missed y'all. So I'm excited about this. All right, let me go ahead. It's going to play it again. Hopefully it's okay. Shh. And to the next screen, to the next screen. No more yelling. Okay. All right. This is going to be our agenda. I'm going to make me a little smaller because this is like a big agenda. Okay. So we're going to first start with some definitions because the girls are always in confusion when it comes to race, ethnicity, and nationality. I'm going to start this by saying Erica Mena is not an Afro-Latina. Calling her an Afro-Latina is wildly disrespectful to the millions, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions actual Afro-Latinas that populate parts of the Caribbean, Latin America, South America, Central America, the Garifuna, all of them. We're going to get into this. We're going to do that. And then we're going to go with some broad definitions, colonization, caste, and the foolery of it all, and why you can't decolonize your mind if you don't know anything about colonization in the first place. And since most of us in the US are not taught about Spanish colonization, it is necessary to have a little background information on this. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to get into the creation of Latinidad, and it's sponsored by Goya. Just kidding. It's sponsored by Univision, which, if you've ever watched Telemundo, is quite interesting and makes sense. And it's also wildly problematic. Okay, then we are going to get into mestizaje, which mestizaje is the Spanish translation of miscegenation, which means mixed race, and the erasure of the indigenous and the African. Largely, the largest problem with coining 660 million people as Latinidad that do not technically share the same markers of language, origin, culture, food, etc., is that you erase the people that were there in the first place before Christopher Columbus decided to sail the ocean blue and bring disease, famine, warfare, and then all of the other expletives that come with colonization. So we're going to talk about that. And then in the end, we still have a shared issue because in the end, I still hold true to the fact, while I would love us all to participate in this project that the United States has now deemed called POC, and everyone to participate in removing global anti-Blackness, statistically, how people who are treated of Latin descent that are marketably indigenous as well as Black are similarly treated as Black Americans, African Americans, Black immigrants. We get treated the same in the end. So I have some statistics to gather us together into some solidarity. After the dragging first. All right. So this started with our current queen of dancehall, Ice Spice Official, who has taken the reins from Lady Saw and is doing a wonderful job. I listened to that song that she made, that jokey song about Kylie, and okay, anyways, a little bit too often. It brings me a lot of joy. And as you saw in the clip that I already played, unfortunately, Erica chose to let her racism come out loud and strong. It should be noted because I've noticed a lot of people, I would say largely due to when people have what you feel are your desired texture, features, and complexion, you give them a little grace that they don't deserve. Saying that, oh, she was upset. No amount of upsetness is going to make you call somebody a racial slur unless you're a racist. So it should be noted that this is not the first time that Erica has called somebody a monkey that is Black. We should put that here in the beginning. Nothing Spice should have said, could have said, would have encouraged somebody to call her that unless that person is a racist. All right, we're not going to focus that much on that because I'd rather get to the things that people seem to be a little confused on: race, ethnicity, and nationality. All right, this is a definition of race from Oxford, from Rashawn Ray and Nicole Deloach. And I like their definition. Race is, I would say in the beginning, very dependent on where you live. It's very regional. What counts as Black, white, biracial, quote unquote Hispanic, Latino in the United States is not the same thing as Black, white, colored. That's the actual legal definition in South Africa. That's two different things. The girls are constantly getting into fake arguments on Twitter about this. Race is very specific to the region you're in. Certain regions that are, I would say, arguably maybe smarter than the colonizing regions don't even acknowledge the concept of race, because race is a social construct that has very real negative effects, particularly when you are deemed to be of quote unquote lower caste. All right, so race is a human classification system that is socially constructed. It is not genetic, it is not real, to distinguish between groups of people who share phenotypical characteristics, and is largely used as a way to discriminate against people or to positively put attributes to people who have not deserved them, that have nothing to do with them as a person. All right, so race itself is a social construct that is not real, but the implications of race are very much real, particularly in the United States, in Europe, and I would say largely across the colonized world. All right, since race is socially constructed, dominant groups in society, and dominant in terms of not better, not stronger, not smarter, warfaring groups, I would say might be a better way to phrase them, in society have shaped and informed racial categories in order to maintain systems of power, thereby also producing racial inequality. I think this is a great starting example of what race is, because people be very confused as to what race is. You can change the parameters of race, but how you affect race on people largely is what is racism. When you are the dominant group in power, when you subjugate other people who do not have that power, is racism. Racism in the United States is a one-way street. People seem very confused. Prejudice is a multi-way street. Many lanes on that highway of prejudice. Racism goes one way. There's only one group in this country that has the power to be racist. Now, ethnicity is different because the girls, a little confused. The girls, the gays, the theys, the he's, the hims, the cis-hets, everybody. Ethnicity, an ethnic group, a social group that shares a common and distinctive culture, religion, or language, or the like. For example, let's take we the Caribbean people, West Indians to be specific. No, most West Indians are not Indian. They're Black. But because Columbus sailed the ocean blue, got lost, and decided to name all of North America India, I don't know why it never got changed. So Caribbean people that speak English, that were colonized by Britain, I'll be trying to forget them, that were colonized by Britain, speak varying levels of English dialects, such as Patois. Jamaicans, Grenadians, St. Vincent, I'm not going to remember everybody, Trinidad and Tobago, I said Grenada. I have a lot of Grenadian friends, so I remember Grenada. Barbuda, etc. All of these different places share an ethnic culture. We are largely English speaking, very differing dialects, despite the fact that when you come to America, if anybody hears any type of Caribbean accent from you, they're going to ask you that you're Jamaican. I understand that must be very frustrating for the non-Jamaican Caribbean people. We all are eating various levels of curry. We are eating goat head soup, manishwata, different types of things, etc. We are all descendants of chattel slavery in different forms in these countries. There are very few people that escaped, such as the Maroons. Most of us have descended from people stolen from West Africa, etc. That makes an ethnicity. The race of Caribbean people, West Indians specifically, majority, overwhelmingly is Black. Yes, there are 0.8% white Jamaicans. I find it really interesting that white Jamaicans are very prevalent on TikTok. It's interesting. And that a one Mrs. Chin is very prevalent on TikTok, riling up the nerves of most Black Jamaicans, and she wants to take credit for a dance hall, which is very interesting. The Chin family is interesting. One of my cousins is a Black Chin. And if you're Jamaican, you know what that means, since they have a lot of children that are not of Chinese ancestry. But it is what it is. For example, we would share the ethnicity, but we wouldn't share the race, because there are Chinese Jamaicans. They are ethnically Chinese. There are Indo-Caribbean people from actual India that were taken to the West Indies as indentured servants. We would share the ethnicity. That's where we got the curry from. We're all eating the same curry from them, but we're not sharing the race. The nationality would be we're all Jamaican. It's the same flag we're all flying. I think it's really interesting. So particularly when we talk about race, ethnicity, and nationality, it's often from a very American-centric lens, which is, this is how we do it in America, so everyone else must do it this way. That is not true. So for example, there is a growing, I want to say the heart is always in the right place, but a growing misguided population of people that are now saying very loudly on TikTok, other places, I've seen like a few things, Afro-Caribbean people. That doesn't make no sense. The default of Caribbean is Black. The default of Caribbean is Afro. The majority of Caribbean countries are Black. Cuba, despite popular belief, a Black-ass country. Jamaica, a Black-ass country. Trinidad is one of the few countries in the Caribbean that is not predominantly Black. It is predominantly Indo-Caribbean. The rest of them, Grenada, very Black. All the tiny islands, St. Vincent, St. Martin, St. Thomas, very Black. All of it is Black. Black, Black, Black. You would never say Afro-African. It's weird. And the reason why people are doing this is largely people with academic backgrounds, which is why I say the mind is in the right place. But you didn't speak to the people then. You didn't actually go and do the research of the demographics of like, oh, wait, these are Black countries. So everyone else should get their hyphen. But these Black people is the default of this place. So this doesn't make any sense. So we should stop forcing this on them because they don't like it. And by they, I mean me. It's annoying. So let's continue. Dominica, yes, another Black-ass country. All right. So let's continue now. So colonization in the caste system. One of the things that a lot of people are saying now with Erica Mena, I would say not being ousted as a racist or using racial slurs, of people being reminded that she feels this way about Black people, is that the idea of colonization in the United States is not looked at as colonization. Slavery, if people do talk about it, we'll talk about it. Slavery is a form of colonization. You're taking somebody from a place that they don't belong, putting them in a place that was literally stewarded, run, and owned, if you look at the land that way, by other people. The United States has replaced indigenous people, moved indigenous people from their land and replaced them with a working subset of people, which is Black American people. And now we have other races as well immigrating to the United States. Those other races are not sections of people that came from, for example, Colombia. We have Colombian immigrants. All Colombians are not one identified race of homogenous people. There are Black Colombians, there are white Colombians, there are a lot of indigenous Colombians, and there are mixed race Colombians. A lot of people, in realizing that Erica Mena is not an Afro-Latina, are automatically of the mindset like, oh, she's a white Latina. She's not a white Latina either. Which, the only way to understand that is to understand the colonization and the caste system put in place by Spain. Spain was, you could arguably say still is, the largest colonizers. And when Spain did their colonization, they decided like, oh, they don't got enough rules, those British people. We need more rules. We need more labels. And this is what they decided to do. So I'm going to remove me so I can lean in. So it's very interesting. These are from two different sources, which I have the one on the right. I forgot where the one on the left came in. Once you get towards the top, everything looks the same. In the bottom rung, you have the Native people, the indigenous people, term used at the time for descendants of two Native American parents. Also calling them American is also interesting. Most indigenous people don't refer to this land as America because it's not America to them. Then you have Negroes. So you have the Blacks, we the Blacks. And then you have mestizos, term used at the time for descendants of a Spaniard and a Native American person. Also, the more you look at caste systems, the more you realize this doesn't make no sense. And the fact that somebody in a whole country for hundreds of years is like, yeah, this is what we're going to do, can show you the root of all these mother effing problems. Then you have mulattoes, term used at the time for descendants of a Spaniard and an enslaved African. Criollos, not to be confused with the Creole people of Louisiana. The Criollos under the Spanish were termed at the times for Spaniards born in America. So these are fully Spanish people that happen to be born on American soil because people love hierarchy and categories. Then you have peninsulares, which is the term used for Spaniards born in Spain. So that's who got the most power. And then as those people left and various countries sought for their freedom, the Criollos assumed power. In Mexico, the Criollos assumed power, which again, these are white people born in Spain. They ain't got nothing to do with the Mayans, the Aztecs, nobody indigenous into the place, and was like, okay, listen here, indigenous people and enslaved Black people of Mexico, because there are Black Mexicans. You know what? We should really overthrow the Spaniards. They're not nice to any of us. And by using the indigenous people and the Black descendants of slaves, they, the Criollos, who again are white people, or colonizers themselves said, oh, now we're free. This caste system didn't go away. Largely, if you ever go to visit a Latin country, a country that speaks Spanish, this caste system is very much alive and well. And you see who is serving you at the resort. A resort is a plantation. I have big issues with the resort system in Jamaica, and I bring this up all the time. Some of them are literally built on the same plantation. It is a plantation system designed where they have dark-skinned people usually, or if you are in any of these Spanish-speaking countries, anyone that looks indigenous and in brown skin, that's who's serving you. Because, white Latin person, they can't serve you. No. They're being serviced. They're receiving all these things, and none of these things have gone away. And so when you look at someone like Erica Mena, to say Erica Mena is a white Latina or an Afro-Latina, both are incorrect. And it's largely due to the fact that because we're not even taught about U.S. history in the U.S., most people don't know this. The only reason why I know this is because I did a whole series on Colonizer Exposed on Patreon. So shout out to Patreon. And because this was next on my list. But also I learned this in school from indigenous friends who were from Central America and who took large issues to the idea that they were supposed to be subsumed into Latinidad because their parents largely kept with the idea like, I don't know what the fuck Latinidad is. I know that we're indigenous and these people came over and they burnt everything, and by the grace of whoever and the power of perseverance, we're still alive. All right. So America is equally awful in that America has caste system as well. And this has changed over the years. So this is a chart. I got to put the sources at the end. I forgot. So I can put where this chart came from. So if you want to see it, these are terms used in the US Census from 1790 all the way to the year 2000. So you have enslaved people, of course, and then they started separating out like, okay, you're a free colored person, quote unquote, with the American caste system, specifically in terms of Black people, going something along the lines of Black, free Black, and then you insert the colorism, mulatto, quadroon, octoroon. If you go to Louisiana, you will meet lots of lovely Creole people who make excellent food, gumbo, etouffee, etc. And somewhere in that line, you would insert a Creole person. However, it should be noted that in the terms of what is ethnicity, you could argue that Creole people have a specific ethnic group. These specific type of foods, they have specific traditions, etc. Those are subsumed, I would say, into the Black American South, depending on who you're talking to, and they largely identify as Black. Creole also is not just very high yellow people. It's also brown skin people. I know some brown skin Creoles, and that is a Creole on Creole argument about who gets to identify as Creole. But this is just to show that culture, language, ethnicity is such a specific thing. And when you try to flatten it and say, hey, all of Huno are just this one thing, you erase people's culture. You erase what makes them and their family them, what their communal ties, all under the idea that colonization doesn't care about nobody's culture. Colonization cares about money, profits, and erasing other people. That's all it cares about. Yes, shout out to the brown skin Creoles. Shout out to Alexis, my dear friend from law school. But yes. Also, shout out to Louisiana. Louisiana, I would say, if more people were actually taught American history, if you learn the history of Louisiana, then it's easier to understand how other places do things differently. With, of course, it would be very wild. Do I want to admit this right now? No, I don't. It would be very wild in today's day and age to angrily call somebody a quadroon, which means one of your grandparents is Black. Just one. Octoroon, one of your great grandparents is Black. Usually when people say it to you in this day and age, if they have said it to you, it's because you're a problematic light-skinned person and you probably deserve that. Truthfully. Not saying that I said that to anybody recently. But anyways, back to Latinidad, sponsored by Goya. All right, so this is a great quote, which I really enjoyed this article by Brian Balthazar from the Crimson Opinion. This is the Harvard Crimson, in which they wrote, Mexican poet and Nobel laureate Octavio Paz once famously said, Mexicans are descended from the Aztecs, Peruvians from the Incas, and Argentinians from the ships. Argentina, the wild place. These are the general origin stories of 3 Latin American nations, the last alluding to the heavy European presence in Argentina, especially from Germany. It should be noted, and it's unnoted in the history books, Argentina is one of the largest receivers of enslaved African people. Currently, if you go to Argentina, you'll be very pressed to find not nary a Negro in Argentina. And that's largely because they had a large, throughout the 1800s, what one could only call a genocidal attempt to remove Black people from Argentina, where they put descendants of enslaved Black people into camps, gave them all types of diseases such as syphilis, similar to what they did to indigenous people. So much so, it was so effective in removing Black people. Oh, is it? God damn it, need this battery. You know what's crazy? I got a dummy battery and I don't know if the dummy battery works. Let's try it. Okay, we're going to take a pause. Actually, let me put this here and let me try see if the dummy battery will work. If a dummy battery doesn't work, then, oh goodness, then we'll just use the computer one. And the computer one looks so bad. I'm getting a new camera though. I'll just chat to y'all while I figure this out. I'm getting a new camera, so I'm super excited about this one because this one, as y'all know, times out at 30 minutes. Also, thank you for telling me that the battery was low. This one times out at the 30-minute mark. So I'm getting a new camera because after talking to people that know way more about tech than me, they let me know that this camera don't have no other functions, y'all. It can't do what I want it to do, which is live stream for an hour. So I'm getting a new one. And let's see if the dummy battery I bought works. I tried it beforehand. That's why I was late. And it wasn't working. So hopefully y'all can hear me. This is also a test of whether or not, oh gosh, this is going to be interesting. Okay. Let's see if the dummy battery works. Hold on while I play around with it. All right. I'm here. I'm just like on the, oh, looks like the dummy battery works. Maybe. I see myself. Let's see. Let's see. I think we're in the money. Okay. I think we're in the money with the dummy battery. Let's see if y'all can see me. Oh, okay. One time for the dummy battery. Awesome. All right. Okay. And thank you, Sage Moon, for that. I appreciate y'all. So we were talking about Argentina, and it was so successful, their erasure of not only African people, also indigenous people. Obviously, they erased indigenous people first, and then they were like, oh, these Africans we brought in to do all this hard labor and build this damn country, we don't want them anymore. We need to remove them. It is quoted in the history books that it is estimated that Argentina, so estimate, not quoted, it is estimated that Argentina, the amount of, calling people imported is wild, the amount of people they stole from West Africa was about half the amount of the United States. That's millions of Black people gone, disappeared from this earth. Brazil is also a very Black country. Contrary to what Brazil puts out in PR, what Brazil puts out in magazines, what you go to Brazil, I've been to Rio, it's very Black. It's very Black, it's very happy, I love it. Brazil tried to do the same thing, very unsuccessful, thank goodness. All right, so let us continue. Now, Latinidad is not something that is intrinsic. That's not something that was always there. It was not, hey, we're on the same continent. Of course, all these people from different places, including the people that have colonized us and ruined our land, get along. Latinidad was created in 1985 by, again, a very well-meaning, I want to say well-meaning, academic named Felix Padilla. And Professor Padilla taught at CUNY for many years, was the head of the Latin American department. He published this article. It's the first time you see the term Latino ethnic consciousness, the idea that Latinidad is one solid group of people in 1985. So Latino ethnic consciousness, the case of Mexican Americans and Puerto Ricans in Chicago. That's specifically who he's writing about. It should always be noted the same way when people stir up like fake panic about Black immigrants. Black immigrants only exist usually in major hubs, child. We come from the country and we live in a city. New York, Miami, depending, like if you're West African, there are large amounts of West Africans in Houston, in LA. Caribbean people are very much East Coast. Depends on where you're going. Similarly, if we are looking at statistically where the majority of Latin immigrants were going at the time in the 80s, you have Chicago, so the Chicanos, New York, of course, lots of Puerto Ricans in the Bronx, and in Miami. You have the Cubans in Miami. Then you have largely, I think it's incorrect to call Mexican people immigrants when they're in Texas because large parts of Texas was Mexico. A lot of those people never left. They were like, well, I was already here and y'all redrew the border and I'm actually where I was to begin with, which is an interesting conundrum. So in this article, according to Padilla, the Latino ethnic identity develops from the cultural and structural similarities of two or more Spanish-speaking groups. So largely the way Latinidad was originally constructed was, well, y'all speak Spanish, y'all must have things in common. Instead of saying like, oh, y'all are both colonized by Spain, maybe you have the same traumas at best. And often in response to common experiences of social inequality, which is very interesting because as immigrants that have admittedly varying levels of brown skin, they were treated bad. Collective whiteness was never going to treat these people good. In that, ethnic identities have to a large extent been encouraged by the division of the labor market in America's industrial society. He argues that the Latino consciousness represents a situational ethnic identity which functions, according to the needs of the groups. He described how such conditions as poverty and racial discrimination have necessitated the assertion of a broader Latino ethnic consciousness and behavior, often more successful in social action than individual cultural or national associations. And in that, to be honest, the way Latinidad was originally constructed between Mexican identity in the United States and Puerto Rican identity, two groups who are largely at that time in the 1980s disparaged, treated bad, treated the same way as Black people. Treated the same. It made sense. Like, oh, we're in poverty because we can't be white and we don't speak the language here and we're doing all of these things. So like, oh, of course, maybe we'll get on and get a little more together. That seems well-meaning. The minute it went awry is fast forward. We have to go backwards and fast forward at the same time, which is around the 1980s, a very wealthy Mexican entrepreneur, billionaire decided, you know what? All these new immigrants, I can make some money off these people. And largely, it should be noted, that person wasn't indigenous. That person wasn't African. That person, I don't think, based on the picture, was mixed race. He was Criollo. He very much looks like a version of white Spaniard, grew up in Mexico. So this is from Race and Ethnicity in Advertising in America, because everything in America is about money. And his name, we're going to specifically talk about him, but his last name was Azcagara. First tried to secure, let me make this bigger so y'all don't see me leaning in. Okay, first tried to secure time from American TV stations in order to import programming from his sizable Televisa TV network in Mexico, but faced likely racially motivated institutional opposition. Again, it can never not be noted that if everybody will realize that anti-Blackness fuels America and anti-Indigenous behavior fuels America, we would all get on much better if everyone tackled those things. Everyone tackle those things because collective whiteness is not going to let anybody else win. All right. So they wouldn't allow him to purchase the TV stations outright. The purchase was negotiated through a group of business partners because of FCC restrictions barring non-citizens owning more than 20% of any U.S. TV station. But despite this, the operational control of the stations fell to Azcagara and Televisa, bringing Latin American programming to Los Angeles and San Antonio. The SIN-SICC conglomerate soon expanded to 16 stations and was later connected by satellite, giving them a national reach for their programming as well as their advertisers. Keyword on advertisers. By 1982, SIN would claim to reach 90% of Latina households and was later named, who everybody knows, Univision, which is still alive today. All right, and this is his name. He passed away almost 2 decades ago. Emilio Azcagara, billionaire who ruled Mexican broadcasting, is dead at 66. And it's a little disingenuous. So this is from, I think this is the New York Times or the Miami Herald, to say Mexican broadcasting, because what he did was he, under the guise of like, okay, people are realizing we're not like that great off in this place. I'm going to rally all these disparate groups from varying parts of what we're now calling Latin America together, and I will become a billionaire. That's what he did. A hard-driving billionaire who put his family's television and radio network into the largest media empire in the Spanish-speaking world died of cancer Wednesday, 1997, at a residence he maintained in Miami, home of another large demographic of quote-unquote Latinidad. He was 66. He was known as El Tigre because of his sharp sense of timing, aggressive business practices, and the distinctive shock of white hair that drew a stripe across the top of his head. That man was about his coins. He wasn't about no cultural community. And this is 3 generations. You see Mr. Ascagara in the middle. You see his son, Ascagara the third, essentially to the right. The other picture I had of the son, he's holding an Emmy. He's doing very well. He does not give a damn about, again, the professor's professed desire to realize like, oh, wait, we're getting forced into poverty. These ones is not in poverty. These is 3 billionaires. And that's their great-granddaddy who was also an entertainment mogul in Mexico. So I highly recommend, you can always learn the best things from the source, from people who really know their history and really are like, you know what? The only way for me to get the hell out of this is to do this. This is Professor Anahuac. They have a really, really great YouTube channel called Mexican Excellence. I highly recommend. On their channel, it's all about decolonization. They give free classes. I've been slowly like working my way through them. Excellent information, and particularly about decolonization and how mestizaje, which is the idea of not just miscegenation, but calling people separate things to give people certain perceived benefits, is an ideology of white supremacy. I highly, highly recommend to watch this, because I think when you see what has happened to indigenous people, you can see what has also happened to Black people, and how starting from a point of not understanding how the first people got erased is really nonsensical. Like, you really have to understand, like, hey, what the hell happened to them people that used to live here that we're all now, people are doing foolishness, wearing headdresses when they don't need to wear headdresses, doing nonsense as if the people didn't exist, largely in Latin America and various countries. Particularly if you go to Guatemala, Guatemala is largely indigenous still. You wouldn't know that based on the fact that the tourism board largely likes to put white Latinos in photos. When I was there, I didn't see not one white Latino. I went like years ago when I was in law school. Great time. Me and my friend from law school, we went. So I highly recommend watching their channel, and shout out to them for, you know, out here doing the work, educating people. So I thought this was great. I'm going to have to make this bigger. Hopefully y'all can see this meme. So the meme is a car, and on the car, it's veering off as if it's missing exit, and the car says Latinidad. And then it says, if you keep going straight, you have admitting racism and anti-Blackness exists, and commitment to build solidarity with Black and Indigenous people. You see the car of Latinidad driving off, swerving very fast, mestiza supremacy, and your insistence that your great-great-great-great-grandmother was Black. Mestiza now, before, according to the chart, the way the Spaniards, the original conquistadors, envisioned it was mestiza was you are mixed of white, Spanish ancestry, and Indian. Mestiza, how it's used today, is you're just mixed in general. That's like, if you ask somebody in Latinidad what is mestiza, if they're referring to it, Erica Mena, J-Lo, etc. Largely people where you're like, okay, that's not a Negro, but that's not a white lady either. That's largely that. And it's largely this insistence on like, oh, wait, in America, y'all said y'all wasn't in America when we had that conversation, and neither was I. So trying to apply the American one-drop rule to a whole different subsection of people without simply just acknowledging like, hey, we have our own history. We need to learn the history. One of the awful things, I think, the lasting impacts of colonization and why it's so pervasive, because people think it's neo-colonization, the resorts. The resorts are not neo-colonization. The resorts are continuation of colonization. We still feeding Huno on a place that you have no business being. We have continued colonization. One of the lasting impacts of that is robbing people of history and robbing people of the fact that colonization is a concerted effort. It's not like, oh, you know, I accidentally landed over here, like Christopher Columbus said, like, oh, it was an accident, and you know, we just wanted to learn more about y'all. It's not like that. It's very purposeful. It's very planned. The Berlin Conference that cut up the entire continent of Africa and gave different pieces of Africa to European nations is not like, oh, you know, we were well-intentioned. No, you wasn't. You're thieving, you're stealing, you're doing nonsense, and that's just the nice end of it. Now, the person that made this meme, their Instagram is Migrants Scribble. People often ask why I'm so vocal about Latinidad and why I seem to, quote unquote, not meet Latin X's where they're at. To be honest, when I get this question, I sometimes stay quiet. What this type of commitment alludes to is that I should be patient with all anti-Black violence paired with indigenous erasure. Calling Erica Mena, again, Afro-Latina, is erasing the hundreds of millions of Afro-Latinas that are actually running up and down this place, such as Celia Cruz, God rest her soul. What this type of comment alludes to is that I should be patient with anti-Black violence paired with indigenous erasure. I refuse to meet violence and be patient with violence simply because we share a slight cultural identity. This is my latest meme. Happy Friday. Hashtag Latinidad is canceled. All right. And just to show you the variations of quote unquote Latinidad, this is Proud Board leader Enrique Tarrio, Cuban man, who recently was sentenced to 22 years in prison, the longest for a January 6th defendant. And if you're wondering how a brown adjacent man could be leading a white supremacist group, all you need to know about, how do I say this kindly? My former neighbors in Miami is that the majority of Cubans in Cuba, if you touch down in the country of Cuba, are Black. The majority of Cuban immigrants in Miami, around 2 million people, are white Latinos, are white descendants of Spaniards, landowning, heavy emphasis on the landowning, Latinos who fled Fidel Castro and communism. That is partial of the story, which is why there are large classes between white Cubans and broader 305 Black, as T.S. Madison said. Because the 305 Black is very much like, yeah, we're Black. And people who ascribe to whiteness are inherently anti-Black. Inherently anti-Black. And so that's how you get somebody whose skin is a little bit tan, but who's very much like, oh yeah, Chad, Brad, Thad, and the rest of the white supremacists, oh yeah, that's for me. That's for me. And it's very, thank you, Hialeah. Listen, the amount of arguments my 17-year-old self canvassed for Obama, because I couldn't vote because I was 17, canvassed for Obama, the amount of arguments me and the abuelas got into over whether or not Obama was a citizen, whether or not he was qualified, whether or not socialism was going to come and knock on their door in Hialeah was very interesting, because you have a subset of people who, depending on who you ask and how kind they want to be about this conversation, who largely very conservative, wildly anti-Black, very much like, oh, well, we left for a better life, these things, and tell a certain version of their history while completely ignoring and erasing that Cuba is a Black-ass country. It's very interesting. Also, if you ask a Jamaican of a certain age, my grandparents included, a lot of older Jamaicans used to vacation in Cuba. So you're going to get a very different conversation around how that occurred. You're going to get a very different conversation. And again, it's a very interesting level of just utter foolishness, to be honest, nonsense, to campaign against he wasn't perfect. Let me put that out there. I don't agree with a lot of things post now that I'm grown, but to campaign against the person that actually believes in societal benefits, or say they do, or says they does. Let's start there. Says they believe in societal benefits when you yourself are in need of EBT, social services, and societal benefits, and to actively campaign for Trump. It's wild. It's wild behavior. It's wild behavior, and I don't think I could ever forgive it. But I'm gonna say that. I'm gonna say that. Homestead is a wild place. Homestead is Redlands. All of it is a wild place. All of it is a very wild place. All right, so let's get back into it. And to bring up DR next to Haiti, the amount of I'm not Black, I'm Dominican. Y'all would have been free in 1804 if you had chose to be Black. That's none of my business either. So we're not going to do that. So miscegenation, mestizaje, and erasure. So this was, I think, a very interesting, it's not really an article, it's more of a conglomeration of statistics, which is the breakdown of Latin American ethnic groups, which shows why the idea of Latinidad just punishes people who are actually indigenous and actually African. So whether or not people who are of African descent want to be called Afro-Latina or they just want to be called straight up Black. I know people that are Spanish speaking African descendants that they're like, I'm just Black. Like, I don't know Latino, anything to have a strong aversion to it. This largely shows why painting Latinidad as this broad brush doesn't make any sense. So the trend in many of these Latino American countries is for more individuals to self-identify as white and for fewer individuals to identify as indigenous or black. That does not mean the demographic is changing to white. That simply means people, rightfully so, to be honest, if you realize that you get certain benefits and you get treated like an actual person, if you check a box or do something else, people are like, oh, check the box. People don't want to be discriminated against. People don't want to suffer in poor living conditions. These countries conduct a census at varying times, hence the difference in dates. The data is from the CIA. Take the CIA apart with what you want. So speaking of Dominicans and the father of telling everyone they not black, they Dominican, which I do know a few very much black Dominicans, and it's a few. It's a handful. And there are a decent amount on this channel. So shout out to y'all gathering your cousins, because your primos be bothering me. Child, your primas need to accept what it is. Because when I went to DR, I was like, oh, it's similar complexions like in Jamaica. Oh, okay, interesting. Rafael Trujillo, the Dominican dictator. Rafael Trujillo was a notorious racist. He conducted many ethnic cleansings against Haitians. Haiti and Dominican Republic share the island of Hispaniola. And it's an arbitrary line. It's an arbitrary line built by their varying colonizers, France and Haiti, and then Spain and Dominican Republic. Again, the Haitians been free for over 200 years. I'm just saying, freedom could have found more people. Freedom could have found more people if people did not believe in the idea that white is right. Freedom could have found a lot more people. He also notoriously, during World War II, took in a lot of Jewish refugees, particularly because he said, and quote, he wanted to lighten the complexion of the population. He was a huge colorist, a huge racist, a downright awful ass person. And that type of thinking, I don't think has largely changed. It's very wild to me if I look at someone that looks just like me to tell me they're not black, they're Dominican. I'm just like, oh, okay, Delulu is a big island, and that's none of my business. So if we're looking at certain stats, just to go into why the concept of Latinidad actually erases indigenous and African people, here's Bolivia, a beautiful country, for example. So you have people in these countries, because these countries, again, through most of these countries, you're seeing now in varying elections, Colombia now has their first black vice president. She's out here doing the thing. And you see a lot of indigenous groups getting a little bit of representation in some of these countries, in that they're like, hey, y'all are on our land. Actually, I'm done with it. But in terms of the studies, typing people in this way is specifically to discriminate against them. Also, the other argument of that is if you don't actually categorize people, you can't see when the discrimination is happening. So I'm definitely of the fact that, like, hey, you need to categorize people because people will colonize if not. You have to categorize them to show, like, hey, I noticed the 10 million black people that you have over here, you treat all of them bad. If you don't have anybody allowed to say, like, hey, I'm black, then you get into that problem. France is that way. France, you're not allowed to classify people by race. France is a large racial problem. French people will tell you there is no problem because they don't got no demographic data on that. The problem, in my opinion, with categorizing people lies in the fact that you're using colonizer language to categorize people in ways that they don't want to be categorized. So you will see here, the term mestizo is still used in Bolivia. And that is because the people running Bolivia, is not indigenous people. Because I'm sure people would be like, I don't want to be called this anymore, but it is baked into their systems at this point. So you have 68% of people identify as mestizo, 20% identify as indigenous. The numbers for indigenous are probably a lot larger, but again, people are being encouraged, if not forced, to check like, oh yeah, I have closer proximity to whiteness, so I can get something. And that's not the people's fault. That is the government's fault. And that is the colonizer's fault in the first place, who colonized the country in the first place. 5% white, cholo, chola, 2%, 1% black. Very interesting. 1% other. Note, result among surveys vary based on the wording of the ethnicity questions and the available response choices. The 2001 national census data did not provide mestizo as a response choice, resulting in a much higher proportion of respondents identifying themselves as belonging to one of the available indigenous identity choices. The use of mestizo and cholo varies among the response choices. And largely, I wonder if when they added that category, they started encouraging like, hey, tell your kids that they need to mark this other thing, which is very interesting. All right. So then you have here Cuba, which I know for a fact that this is wrong. Anybody that knows somebody that has stepped foot in Cuba, has seen a picture of Cuba, ain't no way 64% of Cuba is white. There's no way. And I'm only saying because specifically Cubans, in the way that their type system is similar to ours and similar to that graph we showed from Spain, white is the same as what white is here. Similar. Miami is full of blonde hair, blue-eyed Cubans. There is no 64% of Cuba in Cubans is 64% of white people. Mulatto or mixed race, 26%. Black, 9.3%. Cuba is overwhelmingly Black. And this is from the 2012 National Census, and this is largely because they're telling people to mark mixed race or to just straight up mark white. Now, Dominican Republic. If you've been to Dominican Republic, again, 70% have marked mixed. Mestizo, Indio, 58%. Mulatto, 12%. 70% of DR is not mixed race. 70% is not. It's okay. It's okay. It's happy to be nappy. It's happy to be nappy. Y'all gotta let it go. Trujillo is not gonna come back from the dead and traumatize you or terrorize you. You are terrorizing yourself by trying to tell yourself that you're not Black, honey. You're not Black. You are Black. Stop letting Trujillo come from the duppy come and terrorize you. This doesn't make no sense. Now, it is very interesting in terms of, again, race and ethnicity is regionally, is region specific. So respondents self-identified their race. The term Indio in the Dominican Republic is not associated with people of indigenous ancestry, but people of mixed ancestry or skin color between light and dark. So the idea in DR, they will avoid the word Black. The word Black is like a pejorative, like, largely. Sadly, unfortunately. So create another term, which is like, okay, you're brown. Indio is similar to like what people understand the word morena to be, which is because we've heard enough songs about what morena is. It's a similar concept. All right. So just to drive home the point that Erica Mena is not Afro-Latina. These are her parents, according to the World Wide Web. Her mom is, I would say, brown-skinned woman. And that is a white Hispanic man, a white Spaniard man. Okay, all right. We're gonna put that out there. Now, actual Afro-Latinas, Celia Cruz, the most famous, the most beloved, Azucar Cruz over here, everyone knows. Afro-Latina in the fact that obviously, like, she had a lot of stage performances, so there are pictures with her natural hair as well. But you see, West African features, brown skin tone. I know people from all parts of Latin America that very much look like they came from West Africa yesterday. It's the same thing. If you look at the Garifuna people, who I recently learned a little bit about their history in watching this food video, fascinating history, which they are descended from people who are originally captured in Nigeria from 2 ships, captured in Nigeria. They commandeered and stole the ship, and they're like, to hell with y'all. So I'm not doing any of that. They landed in the early, I think like 1630 in the 1600s. They ended up in Honduras. They landed in St. Vincent first. They landed in St. Vincent, and instead of trying to overtake the indigenous people or to run amok, they actually, cooperatively assimilated together with the indigenous people and created their own specific ethnicity and culture, and have survived for 400 years in parts of Panama, St. Vincent, and Honduras, and on the Caribbean side of Guatemala. So there are so many people that when you label people, I don't think anybody in their right mind is calling J-Lo Afro-Latina, but when you label people like Erica Mena as Afro-Latina, you are literally erasing so much history of people who are alive and well and thriving and are like, what do you mean? I don't know what that is. All right. Oh, Belize as well. Yes, I know I forgot one. Yes, and Belize as well. Yes. Oh, I didn't know they were in Nicaragua. Thank y'all. All right. So more Afro-Latinas. You have Gina Torres on the left. You have Amara La Negra, which Gina Torres made a comment the other day. And you know what? I was like, girl, why did you say this? This is a mess. Like, this is inappropriate. Where she said she was tired of playing Black characters. And if we want to read it nicely, maybe she meant she was tired of playing Black American characters. I didn't like that she said that. She is proudly an Afro-Latina. One of the things that was interesting, though, if you read the whole interview, which was the implied context of what she was saying was she wanted to play more Latina characters, but people don't see her as Latina. And that was very interesting. And I was like, see, you're holding on. She, unfortunately, in her big age, holding on to a construct that was not built for her. The idea of Latina is not real. It is an advertising scheme created to tell people, come to my resort, spend money. Oh, look at spicy this, blah, blah, blah. It's the same thing they do with Caribbean people. The idea that people really think that Jamaicans, everything Irie, yes, we're smiling. And then also simultaneously, if you know anybody that lives in close proximity to Jamaicans, are like, damn, the lady at the patty shop is, wow, she's a little curt. She'll never have no oxtail. She'll never have no gravy. And I'm like, yeah, because that's how we really act. I don't know why anybody would let a propaganda commercial let them think that we're docile. We're not. And it's largely when people say, when you have some, I think she's like one of the few. I think Dasha Polanco might have made not a similar comment, but like a adjacent-ish comment, is when they are typecasting who is Latina, it's largely people who are mestiza, according to that awful ass caste structure, but people who are slightly tanned, where there's a little bit of something else, but it's not white. And I would say the interesting thing about Latinidad in general is if you ask white Latinos, they are also largely trying to a little bit in terms of looks, because it gets them something, assimilate into a little bit of complexion, which is a very fascinating thing. A very fascinating thing, and largely you can see that simultaneously, like in American culture, the Kardashians and like their version of ethnic smudging. You see that a lot with white Latinos, where they're like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna put a little kink in it. I'm gonna put a little tan, and we're all the same." It's like, no, we're not. One of us needs to apologize, and the other one has some foolishness to do. So, with all that being said, it's still black and brown. And I always try at the end when we have these conversations to rally for the fact that I'm still of the mindset, having grown up in Miami, sans the white Cubans, I mean, with other people from Latin American countries, and having lived in New York now for a whole decade, when we're talking about who is negatively impacted from racism, it is Black people, and it is people who sometimes will refer to themselves as brown. Oh, here we go. Hold on. Sometimes refer to themselves as brown, but are actually, if you were to watch Mexican Excellence's videos, maybe in need of a decolonizing process of like, baby, you're not brown. You are indigenous and you should be proud, and go get your history back from them people, because you deserve to know where you come from. Because it's still us, and we're still getting treated bad collectively together. So this is a really old article. There were some newer ones, but I liked the type they used, to be honest. So I pulled it from 2015. It's largely the same, which is Black and Latino segregation and socioeconomic outcomes. Between 1970 and 2010, the U.S. Latino population grew from 8 million to more than 45 million, most of whom live in the nation's largest metropolitan areas. As this growth continues, Latinos seem to be inheriting the segregated urban structures experienced by African Americans. Despite this pattern, there is a scarcity of research on the effects of Latino segregation. Largely, the best diaspora project, if we're being honest, in the United States is from the South Bronx, and that is in the 50th anniversary, is hip hop, made from Black Americans in the South Bronx, Caribbean immigrants, large amounts of Jamaicans, and Puerto Ricans. It's a great group project. Look what happened when we all just banded together and we did all these lovely things. Wow. And it is largely due to the fact that if you live in large metropolitan areas, Chicago is similar. Their segregation is a little bit different. It's largely segregated. No amount of trying to badmine or talk down on Black American people is going to get you closer to whiteness. It's not going to work. The only group, which Khalil Green had a great TikTok / reel. I saw it on a reel, you know, I'm millennial. Saw it on a reel about this, which is throughout the 1800s, you had differing ethnic groups. So Irish people, Italian people, to which Protestant, English, Scottish-esque descendants were like, oh, y'all are the gross. Y'all can't be white with us. Y'all go be with the Black people. Y'all are awful. And then they realized, like, oh, wait, you know what? Maybe we need them for numbers. Let's subsume them into collective whiteness. Tell them to get rid of their culture. Tell them they don't need to season their food no more. You know what? Come over here. And Khalil Green, his post was largely about how certain parts of supposed Latinidad are going to break off into collective whiteness. You lose so many things. I would say when I saw that, I was like, oh, so we're talking about the white Cubans in Miami. Because that's the largest demographic that largely very conservative again, has some of these views. But what happens when you trade in, when you think you're going to get safety, protection, community from collective whiteness that believes in individualism, that believes in pull yourself up by the bootstraps, blah, blah, you'll lose your culture. There will be no more pastelitos. There will be no more croquetas. There will be no more bistec that really needs some more salt. I never understood how they could be in the Caribbean, but they don't. It's no me pica over there. They don't eat spicy food, which I always thought was really interesting growing up. I was like, y'all the only ones. Like, how y'all don't eat any spicy food? But they don't eat spicy food. And largely, it's a lose-lose situation. It's not a good idea. Is that going to stop people from doing it? No, it's not going to do. It's not. So findings. In cities across the countries, whites consistently exhibit better socioeconomic outcomes than native-born Latinos and Blacks. They are more likely to graduate from high school and college, specifically talking about white people. White people are more likely to be employed and enjoy higher earnings. Importantly, however, our analysts suggest that these gaps are wider in metropolitan areas with higher levels of residential segregation. One of the things that I observed working in tech for 7 years was there were so few Black people, but there were way more Black people than people who were from Latin American countries. I worked at 2 separate startups where we started our own employee resource group. So group, for the Black employees to be like, hey, we're going to pull resources. We're going to get funding for these things, etc. And in both of those, where there were 10 to 15 of us, of Negroes, there were less than 3 Hispanic people. And in both situations, I was like, hey, do y'all just want to be like in our group? Because there aren't enough of y'all and y'all seem lonely. And, these white people don't care about 9 of us. And largely, we can do better together. But that would require a fundamental understanding that trying to assuage white supremacist culture doesn't benefit you. And it doesn't benefit anybody. And Erica Mena and all of her internalized racism, well, it's not even internalized, all of her racism, it's not Black, all of her racism is not going to benefit her, because what's going to happen to them kids? What's going to happen to her? What's going to happen to the fact that she's surrounded herself by all these Black people, and who's going to take up for her? Not white people. It don't make no sense. It doesn't make any sense. And that's a lesson that she has to learn on her own, probably with lots of therapy and hopefully lots of apologizing. Because if I was Spice, I'd be like, so we're going to start with the apology. And, if you're not listening, you must feel. So that's where that would be at. So let's go through the comments. Let's start. I'm gonna just put this on the agenda, so that way, in case you tune in, the agenda is there. All right. Okay. Should we go to the beginning? We're gonna start halfway. Okay. Oh, yes. Everyone should read Caste. This is a great book. Robert recommended this to me as well. The Origins of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson. I need to finish it. All right. I really was going to put it on screen. So glad. I was so happy to go to college. I was so happy to be like, y'all, I'm done with y'all. I'm done with y'all right now. I'm done with y'all. Okay. Who's Afro-Latino? They said he's Afro-Latino. In what planet? Who? Oh, the Proud Boys, man. Ciao. Bye. And I think it's also really interesting that we have, again, is people typing other people into like what they're like fictive imagination, instead of actually asking actual Afro-Latinos like, hey, y'all claim this man? Y'all know this man? Do you know him? No? Okay. Sorry. We'll stop that. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. And I think also, I meant to say this again. I meant to say this. I don't think I said it when we were talking about the racial caste system that exists in the United States, which the caste system obviously is not octoroon, quadroon, any of that anymore. But it very much has to do with colorism, texturism, featureism. And largely, a lot of people, what I've noticed, who are admittedly maybe a tint of mestiza, but mostly leaning very much white Latina, will disingenuously argue you down and be like, y'all accept the Creoles as black, so why can't I be Afro-Latina? And I'm like, the Creoles been black. They've been black. And also, you're pointing again at the high yellow Creoles when there are brown skin Creoles. And all of them, to my knowledge, have been very black this whole time. So you, in the past 2 years, wanting to randomly claim your great abuela, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. This is a good call. Gang will Tario join in prison. You know what? Maybe books will find him. I hope someone throws a book at his head. Truthfully. That's crazy. Jay, I met an American Express executive who mentioned that when he was in Kenya, lovely country, where I'm from, he went on safari and was carried around in a palanquin by 4 black men. Results are colonial. They're very colonial. They're disgusting. The resorts make me itch, to be honest. Like, if I highly recommend going to Kenya. It's a beautiful place, beautiful people, so kind. You can learn so much. And it's very interesting because Kenya has so many tribes, and how y'all overwhelmingly have like get along with each other. I find I'm like, wow, look at y'all sticking it to the British. You have to do a lot of research about where you stay, how they treat the staff, who is the staff, what is going on. So what I did is I looked up places where I saw other Kenyans going on vacation, which there's a level of like classes and egregious in there. Cause like, oh, are y'all just other like classes and egregious people are going to treat working class people bad? But you can kind of sift through it, but you have to do a lot of research about these places. Cause if not, you'll see some things that it's just gross. It's gross behavior. All right. Okay. Listen, they will hit your car and drive off. That happened to my friend in Hialeah. And she was like, why? And I was like, they just don't care. They just don't care. All right. How do you see it, bro? You know, this every once in a while I think about this, and someone brought this up on Patreon, which is white would say we subscribe to the term black, and they made that. Someone asked on Patreon about whether or not we collectively think that black, saying like we are black, is an appropriate term. And I'm like, I'm fine to be whatever everybody else wants to be. If we want to be mahogany, sure, we can be whatever. Because we've been so many things. I'm fine. I'm fine with whatever everyone else decides. I think it's also interesting because we have a forced shared history at this point when you're a descendant of chattel slavery, whether it's the United States, the Caribbean, and I would think parts of what is South America as well, similar, because colonization is similar. The colonizer changes the experience a bit, which would be like, do we all want the same name? Do we want different names? Do we want to generally understand together, or are we like, oh, it's too different? I think particularly like the United States experience and the Caribbean experience is wildly similar because it is a British colonizer. And while in the US largely, I'm like, what are the words? What are the words you use when people treat other people like chattel? The British largely in the US later would use the Caribbean as a breaking ground for enslaved people and then take them to America and then send them back and then threaten them, which is awful. All right. Okay. Well, did I keep y'all for an hour? I think I did. So I'm going to make this promise now so that way I stick to it because there's enough for y'all in here. We're going to bring back our weekly lives and we're going to do Wednesdays at 5:30-ish. I ain't going to promise the time, y'all. And essentially, if it happens to be a video that I'm like, I don't really like feel that strongly about the video or like whatever, I'll just take it and just put it on Patreon for all of the tiers. But we're gonna go back because I miss doing the weekly lives. It was interesting because then for a while I was like, oh, I don't know if there's a topic, but we'll just do any requests. So if you have any requests, you can always leave them in the comments, and I will keep track of them. And then if there's not anything that I'm like, oh yeah, we should cover that, then we'll just pick from there. And that's what we'll do. You know what? Now that I'm like talking about, I'm like, I feel like I missed one of the slides. Hold on, because it's gonna bother me actually. It was that one. It was that. You know what? I might have deleted it by accident. There was a specific slide. I did delete it by accident. How? So annoying. There's a specific slide I had in here speaking of like the ad scheme, in that, yes, there was the Mexican businessman who ended up founding Univision, billionaire, very wealthy, but the advertising agencies largely who helped co-create the idea of collective Latinidad were Cuban advertisers in Miami in the 1980s. Yeah. And it's interesting because if you know anything and you speak to any Cuban people, they largely don't believe in Latinidad. They're very much like, oh, it's we the Cubans and everybody else, which is fascinating. And it should be noted, because I don't think that they know all the time, the largest demographic of, if we're calling Latinidad a thing, immigrants, is Mexican immigrants. But if you, depending on where you live, people largely like to erase the fact that it's largely Mexican people who are working class that immigrate here, which is problematic. So I appreciate y'all, and I will catch y'all next week. All right. Y'all have a wonderful evening. Bye.